Good morning, everyone. My name is Amber Gunst, and I'm the CEO of Austin Technology Council. And we will be having, I'm sure, a lot more people join us this morning for this conversation. But this is something that is very important to all of us who live in Austin. And it's a conversation that is long overdue. And it's a conversation that is important for ATC to have with our members in our communities, specifically around how we can be agents of change and we can impact positively people who are dealing with issues on a daily basis that I personally have no way to ever understand or ever be able to speak about myself. There are a couple of different ways that you're going to be able to ask questions today. One is on the Q&A in the chat here on the program, or on Zoom. We also have Slido. So if you are logging in from your phone and you want to use Slido app, the code for that is 57312. Again, that is 57312. This is going to be a lengthy conversation. It's probably going to go a little bit over the hour that we have allotted here, but we want to make sure that we're giving a lot of time and a lot of opportunity for people to be able to get information out, as well as provide Q&A afterwards. So I am going to do the right thing right now, and I am going to shut up, because this is not about me and it's not about an experience that I have. And the most important thing that leaders can do, especially leaders who look like me and sound like me and have a background like me, is to hand the bullhorns that we have for our organizations off to people. So this morning, we were very fortunate to have Preston James with Div, Bill Walker with CPI, but I want to pass this off first to Lauren Washington, who is the co-founder for Black Women Talk Tech and Funder. And so I'm going to have Jessica mute me, because this is not about me. This is about all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Washington. I am the co-founder of Black Women Talk Tech. We are the largest conference organization and membership organization for Black women startup founders, as well as Black men startup founders. We had our conference right before COVID hit at the end of February. We had 1,500 people come out for our 4th annual conference in New York City. We have 10 chapters, 9 in the US and 1 in London, where we put together programming, support, funding for Black women founders. I also am the co-founder of Funder, and we are a platform that automates the startup and seed investing process. And that came out of my own experience of being a startup founder and also hearing the stories of my fellow members within Black Women Talk Tech. So I'll pass it to Preston for his introduction.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thank you for coming out. Amber, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Preston James. I am the CEO, founder of Div. Div is a startup ecosystem builder here in Austin. We were founded in 2016. Our focus is serving underrepresented founders and helping them overcome the barriers by providing them access to resources, human, social, financial capital that are essential for building high growth businesses. Since we've launched, we've helped over 70 companies launch their businesses since 2016. And we just recently announced our next program is going to be focused. It's called the Social Justice Innovation Program, where we will be focusing on finding new innovations to eradicate institutional racism across various socioeconomic groups. So healthcare, education, voter suppression, policing, and areas of that sort. So first of its kind here in Austin. And so we're working in collaboration with many organizations, corporations, nonprofit organizations, startup entrepreneurs to really try to move the needle. And just very quickly, my background is a 20-year veteran at Dell, and I made the transition in 2014 into the startup entrepreneurial nonprofit space. So Div is a nonprofit, and so I have the sense of both worlds as it pertains to our discussion today. So thank you again for coming out.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Walker. I'm the managing partner for Career Partners International. We are a part of a global consultancy, human capital consultancy, and we have 300 locations in over 45 countries around the world. We help organizations and leaders really deliver business strategy through their people. And we do that through 4 practice areas: talent acquisition, executive coaching, career transition, and also leadership development. And I just want to reiterate something that I think Amber mentioned a little earlier. This is an open forum, so this is going to be in a conversation format. And we're hoping that this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue around a very important issue. I think as we all know, the events over the past few weeks have sent shockwaves throughout America and the world. The gruesome murder of George Floyd and the subsequent mass global protests have caused a significant number of Americans to question the status quo. The majority of Americans were shocked and surprised at the horror displayed for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on that now famous video. However, there are a group of Americans that were not surprised by this horrific crime at the hands of law enforcement. They are African Americans. Unfortunately, we've experienced in far too many instances a different America than our white counterparts. The differences are not just brutal treatment by some wayward law officers, but also a discriminately unfair criminal justice system, an inferior and second-class education system, frequent housing discrimination, lack of quality health care, and a national economic platform that is not inclusive. As a result of the recent events, I think we can probably say there's a strong buzz in the air that America could be at an inflection point, that she is possibly ready to look in the mirror and have substantive dialogue about the previously mentioned issues, but most importantly, prepared to have a meaningful, raw, and unfiltered discussion and conversation about the elephant in the room: race and racism, specifically systemic racism. We now have corporate CEOs speaking out in support of human and civil rights of Black Americans. Corporate sponsors are being fired for ridiculously insensitive remarks. Powerful sports leagues are rethinking their position on how they can best support their players. And diverse communities from around the globe are protesting and declaring enough is enough. Addressing systemic racism requires sustained systemic solutions. Words, as we all know, are not enough. Thanks for the statement, it's appreciated. In some cases, it's probably even deeply needed. But what really matters now is focused attention on these essential areas: strategy, investment, infrastructure, and representation at the decision-making table. Diversity in corporate America leaves a lot to be desired. There are industries that are what I'll call aggressively pursuing a more inclusive environment. However, if we're honest, if we're brutally honest, and the data supports this, the tech industry lags behind other industries in reference to African American diversity. Like the rest of America, Austin tech companies have an opportunity right now to do a self-examination and have an honest dialogue about their diversity strategy related to topics we're going to talk about and touch on today: culture, hiring practices, leadership commitment, and community engagement. As leaders in the Austin tech space, ask yourselves a critical first question: how do we build a bridge between well-intended statements and our organizational strategy? More explicitly, how do we move from employing potentially marginalizing policies and practices and processes to build an actively anti-biased and inclusive system? Again, our goal today is not to solve all the problems of the world, but to have this act as a springboard for dialogue and to create measurable actions to ignite real change in helping traditionally underrepresented communities of color to permeate every level within the Austin tech industry. You know, one of the things that we thought might be beneficial, and Amber asked us to do this, and we think it might be instrumental in sharing some of our reflections. I know both Lauren and Preston and I have been asked consistently over the past few weeks, how do you feel about what's happening with these recent events? Lauren, would you like to share just a couple of those, Lauren, and maybe give folks a sense of your inward feelings about what's happened?
Absolutely. And thank you for that opening, Phil. I think that was really powerful and really sets the stage for what we want to talk about here today. I will say over the last couple of weeks, it's been overwhelming, truly in a lot of different ways. I think I've been overwhelmed by the support we're seeing, and that's unprecedented. I have not seen that kind of support in my lifetime in terms of having other groups really rally behind us, having brands rally behind us, having people really step forward and supporting what we have been fighting for decades, for centuries, truly. I think I've been overwhelmed by the number of requests we're getting now. Black Women Talk Tech specifically as an organization has been fighting racism within the tech industry. And it's been an uphill battle, to be honest. And now it seems like that understanding is there. And so we're getting flooded with responses, which is great. But again, it's taking us time to sort through them. I will say though, I did want to touch on the corporate aspect in terms of what you might be seeing from some of your employees, because I've been having a lot of conversations with people and they're talking about how they are now having hard conversations in the office. They're sending emails. They want to have meetings with HR and CEOs to talk about these incidences. But as Phil mentioned, this is not new for us, right? It's not that we're newly angry or newly upset. It's that now the culture has shifted and has allowed this open conversation. Whereas before, when these incidents and tragedies have happened, we went into the office and put our mask on, right? We went into the office filled with grief and trauma, and we sat there and still did our work. And so I think now that you're seeing this shift, you can actually see what an open culture looks like and what inclusivity actually looks like. And so it may seem like it's breaking things open and you're having to address things that you didn't before, but this was always under the surface. And now we're allowing people to come out and be their true selves. And I think that's going to carry on into the rest of the conversation around talent acquisition, leadership, culture. All of these things matter when you're trying to hire a diverse workforce. They want to feel like they belong and they want to feel like their voices are included.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Phil, thank you again for the strong opening there. And I would like to offer, my perspective, and I'm sure, you're hearing much of it through the media, but the last couple of weeks have been very, very emotional for me. The first week was very difficult. And having observed, George Floyd, and painful in multiple ways. One, painful as a Black man living in America, that even though it's something that we've seen over and over and over again, somehow this is no less painful. And it just brought out so much emotion in me, to a point where I just had to, stop, share it with my team and share it with people who I know, and really, caused me to shed tears, quite honestly, in pain. And the second part of that is, my experience as a father of 4 children. 3 of them are girls and 1, my son, who's 10 years old. And so, and then, I have a group of friends, their fathers, and most of them have sons who are near, 20s and 30s. And so, as a father, this is so, it was so painful to watch, so painful to experience, and to keep, to say, when is this going to end? Could this happen to my son? Could this happen to my nephew? Could this happen to my godson, and so forth? And again, those emotions, come up as a parent. And then, I would say the third, as a professional, as a business leader, Lauren mentioned, the upward battle that we face as leaders, trying to affect change and trying to, provide opportunities, not just for your organization to drive impact and to drive growth, but also to help others. In our, Lauren and I space, it's about helping entrepreneurs who are innovative and super talented and try to make a way when society has continuously denied them access to the resources that are basically essential. And entrepreneurship is not hard by any stretch, right? It's hard enough as it is. And it just constantly have additional barriers, right? And I think when you throw in COVID-19 and George Floyd's murder in there, then the spotlight shines even more. And I think this was again, Lauren made the great point of, now you're seeing this open-mindedness and hearts being open to, like, oh my God, we do have a lot of these problems, right? They've been exposed at the highest levels, and so I am deeply encouraged by the response across not just the United States, but across the world, not just from one race, but multiple people from all backgrounds are coming in, and that's a big difference. And so, cautiously optimistic as we move forward, because we can't let this die. We have to make the most of this opportunity as we move forward.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Lauren. I share many of the comments that I just heard. It's ironic that we're having a conversation about bias and diversity in the tech industry. I heard someone say a couple of years ago that technology, specifically the cell phone camera, may end up being one of the most effective tools to help initiate structural and policy changes in the areas of human and civil rights, not just in America, but also globally. Like many of you, watching the murder of George Floyd made me angry, frustrated. Again, it was very painful, but incidents like this, and there have been far too many, quite frankly, continue to strengthen my resolve. And as someone who grew up in the 60s, who saw a lot of protests, I'm cautious. I think Preston hit the nail on the head. I'm cautiously optimistic that the recent events that we've seen could be game changers, if you will, in the fight for equal justice in this country. And I also have to say that I'm extremely proud of our younger generation. I mean, who sometimes get a bad rap about social engagement and political indifference. Excuse me. And they showed tremendous courage and passion and intelligence needed. And I think we're on good track with this group leading our country into a better future. So I think with all of that said, I think we'd like to get into kind of the meat of the conversation and begin talking about some of the areas where we think leadership in the technology space here in Austin can really affect change as it relates to diversity. Lauren?
Thanks so much. So we are going to talk about a few different areas: talent acquisition, culture, leadership, and then community engagement. We'll start with talent acquisition, and we also want this conversation to not only level set in terms of what the issue is, but then also make sure that we're giving clear action items for you to take and bring within your companies in order to make these changes. And so we're starting with talent acquisition because those of you who took the poll, that was by far the most important area for you in terms of understanding how to affect change and what you need to do. So I'll start with you, Phil, since this is your background and your area. Tell us what you think the main issues have been leading up to this point. In terms of talent acquisition, in terms of building diversity and diverse workforces. What do you hear from other companies in terms of how it's been, or why it's been hard for them to build that diversity specifically within tech?
Yeah, I think, whether it's, and I think we've all seen a lot of the data over the years, whether it's McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group or Deloitte survey, the studies over the past few years have shown very clearly that diverse companies generate an average, I think it's probably about 30% higher revenue per employee, and that they were 33% diverse companies were 33% more likely to outperform less diverse companies on profitability, and that the ROI for many of these diverse organizations was higher than their less diverse counterparts, right? So the data is there, right? The business reasons are there. The quantitative data and metrics are there to support having a more diverse organization. So I think we have to ask the question, how can tech companies in Austin accelerate the diversification of their workforce, right? And so, I think if I pick out one or two areas, because we'd be here all day really talking about what I think are some intricate strategies to really move the dial. I think the first thing you have to do and be is intentional about increasing diversity, right? Driving an organizational diversity agenda is really, in my mind, a collaborative effort. CEOs are going to have to ensure to a large degree that diversity is an integral part of the company's vision, no question. And then the functional leaders who report to the CEO, right? They also have to have buy-in and sponsor effective diversity programs. And while human resources teams are typically the ones that carry out many of those strategies and some of those goals and help bring those to life, that talent acquisition team, in my mind, plays a vital role in attracting, engaging, and hiring diverse talent. And it starts with awareness and accountability by that talent acquisition team, right? So if we think about goals, vision being set by the CEO, in many instances, strategy being developed by functional leaders, and now those strategies are being carried out, diversity strategies and talent acquisition strategies being carried out by the talent acquisition team, even though they are the gatekeepers. It's interesting, most organizations are not even actively engaging talent acquisition teams and driving the diversity agenda, which is strange unto itself. So there was a survey that was done by Gartner that I was reading a little while back, and it said less than 50% of organizations that were surveyed viewed themselves as good at building a culture of diversity within the recruiting team, right? And so this was found to be partly due to the absence of recruiters' accountability and for achieving diversity goals with no repercussions on recruiters' performance when they missed their diversity goals. And in the same study, I think they found that when organizations held recruiters accountable, whether that be internal or external recruiters, accountable for providing diverse shortlists and diversity hiring, the organizational effectiveness in achieving those diversity goals increased by about 15%. So, I think we have to address the diversity challenges also throughout the hiring process. Does the organization have enough supply of diverse talent? Is there enough bench strength, right? Do the organization's interviewing practices eliminate unconscious bias? The use of AI, I think a lot of us have heard over the last few years, the use of AI has become instrumental in helping to overcome sourcing and selection bias within the hiring process. Does the organization have a strong reputation for building a diverse workplace? These are some of the critical questions I think some of the leaders who are on the call, especially some of those leaders that are within the tech community, these are some of the questions that I think these organizations have to begin addressing with their talent acquisition leaders. And they should track many of these while they're trying to deliver on the company's diversity agenda. Having a diverse workforce, I think, without question, is not just about recruiting, it's also about retaining, right? Diverse talent. And so it's important for all of the leaders within these technology companies to rethink their recruitment, engagement, and hiring practices, not to get them in the door, but to keep them in the door.
I 100% agree. And I really want to emphasize one of the points you made in terms of the goals of diversity and the goals of your talent acquisition team, right? So when you have a sales team, if they are not meeting those goals, there are consequences for that, right? Or if they do meet them, there are rewards. And it seems like a lot of companies don't align their diversity goals with rewards and consequences the way they would for other pieces of their business that are essential. And so if you are putting this out there and saying that diversity is critical to your organization, then you need to show it through actions as well. So I think that was a great point you made. And you also said something about rethinking hiring. And so Preston, I want to talk to you a little bit about that and get your thoughts on this. So you work with these startups who are inherently diverse, right? That's the ones that you find and choose and invest in and support. So tell us what they're doing that is different from other organizations. How do they get to this point where they build these diverse teams and they're able to pull this in and still move forward? What are they doing differently?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lorna. So I think, there are a couple of things, right? And Phil mentioned one of them is the intentionality from the very beginning that these leaders understand that for their business to be successful, not just short term, but long term, that they need strong innovation, but that innovation is also driven by diversity. And so in having a diverse team that allows them to remain very innovative as a company, and also allows them to grow very successfully. So from the very beginning, they're very intentional about how they want to build their teams. One of the key things that I will also say is the culture of the organization is essentially what allows them to position themselves and to be part of a more diverse community inherently, right? And so because the culture is very inclusive, because the culture is welcoming, because the culture is genuinely and authentically being part of a diverse community, they insert themselves into a diverse community. They are allowed to access talent pools that are inherently diverse, right? And so, and I think that's somewhat tough for a lot of tech companies that are, if you're 50 or more, or 1,000 or whatever. I think it's a thing. Something that you have to look at is the culture of your company. And I'll share my, just as an example that, at Dell many years ago, the culture was such that Dow was able to attract significant talent, diverse talent, African Americans, Latinos, and so forth. What became very obvious is that the culture of Dow was not one that allowed them to retain that talent for an extended period of time. Why? Because it became a culture, even for women as well, that African Americans, women thought it was toxic. It wasn't for them, right? It did not welcome them, did not accept them, etc. And so I think over time, a company like Dell has evolved to learn to do better, right, from the retention standpoint. So I think the culture piece is really, really critical in that component. And I think the culture allows companies to better retain all talent, but in particular, if the culture is mindful and is intentional, is thoughtful, is equitable, companies will do much better in retaining that talent for a longer period of time. One other thing that I will say too is when you look at the analyzing, where, and I think this is a really key piece too, is you have to dig down deep and analyze what's going on at your company, right? What do you have? What do you have as your leader? Not only who do you have, how are they getting paid? Not just at the executive level, but all the way through, right? Are women being paid equitably? Are African Americans being paid equitably? Because what happens is in that culture, if the culture says, as a Black person, I will not be able to make, I am not going to make the same amount as my white peer, they are not going to stay, right? If that's always going to be the challenge, right? I'm just not going to stay. They're not treating me equitably. And so why should I give all my time when I'm not being seen that way? And so you need to, we need to peel all that stuff back. And here's the last thing I'm going to say. Some companies are afraid to post their diversity, equity, inclusion numbers, right? Because they might be low. Here's the deal that I would tell everybody as a leader: we already know they're low. We already know we're low. So let's just all assume that where we are, we're all starting off pretty low. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's acknowledging we all have a challenge. The real positive is we're trying to do something about it, right? And then now, not only are you have, accountability internally, but you also have accountability externally. And, the mere fact that your company acknowledges and says, hey, we want to do better, right? That accountability is at a much higher visibility level. And yes, it's going to make you uncomfortable, but hey, at the end of the day, in order to really make change, we do have to get into a space of being uncomfortable as leaders. It is a challenge. It is super hard, right? But we can't back away from this. That's why, we're the leaders, right? We're the ones that have to lean on our teams to help figure out how we, get to this next level. So I encourage, the leaders to really peel back, focus on, let's be intentional. Let's go ahead and share our numbers. Let's get out there. Let's create that accountability, right? Let's open up our doors and build a stronger culture so that we can have greater not only acquisition but retention and also development as we move forward. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think you made some really important points around culture and leadership, because talent acquisition is not just about getting people in the door, like you said,
right.
It's growing them, developing them, advancing them throughout their career. If you have to keep churning over and over again because people don't feel comfortable or valued in your organization, that's not a win for anybody. But I do want to talk about one quick thing. I want to come back to the culture and leadership piece. But I think there's this word that comes about in the tech industry, which is pipeline, right? So everyone talks about the pipeline problem. particularly within technical acquisition and people with technical skills and backgrounds. And I'll throw this out to either of you. What is your answer to the pipeline problem that we see people talking about a lot? I think, Preston, you mentioned going out into communities and sort of being a part of that. But how can you get around that issue? And is it an issue at all?
Asking for me or for Phil?
Either.
Oh, okay. So you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So I think if we break that out into three different areas: technical jobs, non-technical jobs, and then also an area that we very seldom talk about, board engagement. Is there a issue around finding qualified, diverse technical talent? Not if you're really interested in finding qualified, diverse technical talent, because the resources are absolutely there. Now, you may have to be a little bit more creative and innovative to find those resources and work, such as working with organizations in the community who help to connect talented technical talent with organizations. I was talking to a young man yesterday who has a firm here in Austin who does just that. He works with organizations to connect those that have strong technology backgrounds and talent with corporations that are looking for that kind of talent and those kinds of competencies. And then he also provides additional sort of resources around, job boards and around organizational meetings and resource groups to make sure that it's a comfortable bridge that they're walking over in terms of feeling comfortable about going inside this organization, learning as much about the organization as they can. So there are a number of other resources that we can, that I think are available for organizations to really help to identify diverse talent. The second piece of that is, keep in mind, a CFO, a COO for any organization doesn't necessarily have to have technology background to be a successful CFO or COO of an organization. I think sometimes it's that's something that's maybe requested, but within the higher ranks of any of these organizations, they should be looking at filling bench strength, if you will, identifying a diverse talent from across a number of different industries. And that talent is there. And there's a number of organizations that you can tap into that can help you identify that talent. And to some degree, it starts with, the outreach. It starts with employer culture. It starts with your website. It starts with content. It starts with the marketing of your organization so that you are inviting to diverse individuals. But absolutely, I think the second area would be what I call non-technical talent. And then the third area is board involvement. So board of directors and/or advisory boards. And especially for some of the private organizations who may not have a formalized board of directors, but may have an advisory board, I think it's extremely important for them to take a look at identifying diverse talent as it relates to filling that board. And organizations like the National Association of Corporate Directors is an excellent resource for you to identify talent that's already gone through what I'll call board training, right? That's what they do at NACD. They help to train directors to work on boards. And they have a very strong diversity initiative. They just did a blue ribbon study a couple of years ago, taking a look at having more diverse boards and getting board members, corporate board members, more involved with corporate governance issues as it relates to diversity. So I think there's, though I've heard that same concern, Lauren, I think that can be overcome with some innovativeness and creativity.
And if I may, I want to just throw out just a few comments to piggyback on top of Phil. The leadership aspect is really important. And when I say leadership, that can be the executive leadership team or that can be senior leadership team. I can't tell you how important it is for people who you are, if you're recruiting, trying to recruit more African Americans, Hispanics, or women, how important it is for them to see others that look like themselves within the leadership team, right? Like, it's really critical. Like they're invested. Okay, I see someone that does look like me. That's great. Not as a token, but hey, this is what this company is about. That's what it represents, both on the leadership as well as on the board level. That is so key. Phil talked about the content in which you display on your websites and everything else. So important to demonstrate that. Maybe you're capturing videos, maybe but you're showing off the culture of your environment and recognizing where there might be shortfalls, but demonstrating and showing that culture is really key too, right? Is it, if I was, came out of DC before, DC and Atlanta before I came to Austin, and I was a suit and tie type of guy all the time, right? That's how I was, on the East Coast. And to come to Austin, where everybody was wearing jeans and sneakers and t-shirts at work, but that was a whole different thing, right? And had I seen that video, I may not have come to Austin, right? Because of what I was used to. But by the same token, it's like, well, maybe that's a little bit, of a difference for me, right? But I think by showing the dynamics of the organization, I think are awesome. The last piece I would offer is that two small pieces. One, talking about creatively going out to recruit. There are several conferences, not the traditional ones, where you go to the National Black MBA or National Hispanic, MBA conference. Great, right? But there are conferences like Afrotech. There may be conferences like Black Women Talk Tech. There might be other tech-focused conferences that are predominantly African American and Hispanic, and to go to those, but not just go and have a booth, right? But figure out how to do something engaging so that people get an opportunity to see what the company is about. I think we can venture out into that space a whole lot more. And the last thing I will offer as part of that is that a lot of the offers for technically talented individuals don't always require a relocation to Austin. So I think companies need to look at, hey, can we hire this talent, this best talent that we were able to find that happens to be based in Washington, D.C. or Atlanta or Florida or Tennessee, where they've been for the last 30 years. Do we have to ask them to pick up and move to Austin? All right, because oftentimes that'll be a decision, that'll be the decision that says, nope, I'm not going to take that job. I'm going to take something that's closer to my family or whatever that may be. Do we have the flexibility and creativity to allow that person to work from where they are and create more flexibility in their work environment? I think COVID-19 has demonstrated the fact that we can work virtually, that we can have flexibility, that the future of work is upon us. So how do you get in front of that curve to maximize your talent pool internally, no matter where that talent is? And so I think there's a really interesting time right now to stop saying I can't find the talent and really venture out and find the best talent across the board, and then make it as diverse as possible with that top talent, wherever that talent may be.
Hey, Lauren, can I just add something very quickly? Preston brought up some great points. Just think about this for a second. If there were a CEO of a technology firm here in Austin who said, look, I am going to be intentional about increasing diversity, equity, inclusion within my organization. And these are the reasons, and there are a lot of them that some of them we talked about here. in terms of the business case, both qualitatively and quantitatively, as to why you want to have a more diverse environment. And so think about if that person said, hey, look, I'm going to be the diversity champion for my organization. I'm going to be the one, along with the other leaders, that are going to take this thing by the horns and say, look, we're going to implement this throughout the organization, and I'm going to model it. Can you imagine the message that that sends to other employees within the organization and also other CEOs in the tech ecospace, right, and tech ecosystem? So I think, again, part of this is, there's a business case for diversity, but in this environment we're in, it also takes courage. And I think, as we talk about resilient leadership, part of resilient leadership is having the courage to implement change where it's needed.
I 100% agree with that. So let's now move into that conversation of culture and leadership, because we have touched on it a few times, right? And even though the conversation was about talent acquisition, that doesn't exist outside of leadership, that does not exist outside of culture. And so we keep talking about this inclusive culture. What does that actually mean? What does that look like within an organization when it is inclusive?
Yeah. Well, I think we all recognize that, as you mentioned, Lauren, that culture and leadership are paramount to driving business goals within the organization, and that's exacerbated when it comes to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, in this limited time that we have today, I think there's probably a couple or three things that we can maybe kind of focus on. One is, in building an inclusive environment, I think it's important to create an environment where you encourage and draw upon people's unique experiences and their perspectives and their backgrounds to really advance business goals. And to achieve this, I think in this sort of ever-changing, work setting, I think it's important to employ effective communication and training efforts, right? So you got to be able to communicate a diverse, what I call a diversity strategy and goals, permeated throughout that needs to be communicated throughout the organization. And folks need to be trained on what that looks like, right? What does a diverse organization look like? There was a study done, and as you can see, I'm always into the data and the metrics to some degree, but there was a study done by Forbes a little while back where I think they interviewed about 320 executives, and 65% of those executives claimed to have claimed to be in a position to recruit a diverse workforce, but only 44% of them employed retention programs, right? So this kind of signifies a gap in collective progress when it comes to retaining diversity and inclusion in the workplace. In other words, you can't simply have diversity, you must learn to leverage and nurture it so it can thrive, right? So I think those, in a general sense, I think from a leadership perspective, though, that has to be in place. The other thing is, I think we have to use, I talked a little earlier about being creative and innovative about identifying diverse talent. I think we have to use multiple strategies and solutions to retain talent and a diverse workforce. So, whether it's mentoring programs, I think we hit on, Preston, and you hit on this a little earlier, employee resource groups, multicultural talent management, strategic community partnerships, e-learning modules. There's a whole host of strategies that I think can be used and implemented to help retain diverse talent within your organization. And then again, I think the biggest piece, and I just mentioned it a second ago, is I think leaders have to model diversity and inclusion, right? It starts at the top. It's not just a matter of doing what I say, it's doing what I do, it's doing what I see, and that's on a consistent basis. So when they own diversity, they being leaders in the tech industry or any industry for that matter, when they own diversity inclusion, it makes them a part of the diversity inclusion management process, and it sets the tone for the rest of the organization to kind of follow suit. So, implementing a diverse workplace, I think we all know this is not simple, right? This is not a seamless process. This thing can have a lot of variables attached to it. But I think there has to be commitment by leadership. And if we've learned anything over the past few years, it's that it's an ongoing process, right? And it could require, and in most cases does, there's a requirement for outside help, right? Outside consultants, ones that can bring in, expertise and competency to help you align your talent and your culture and your leadership development strategies. So those are the things that I think from a culture and leadership perspective that some of our leaders might want to begin to, and I'm sure they have been thinking about it. I think it's a more a matter of, okay, how do we implement it? And so I'm hoping that the conversation we have today, again, is just the springboard and the first step in helping to develop and implement and execute on some of those strategies.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just want to address a question that was in the chat. So it's really about leadership at the highest levels, right? Leadership within the C-suite and the board. How do you go about training people so that they understand these initiatives and are able to implement them? And is it just about training? How do you create C-suites and boards that are actually inclusive and have diverse leadership on there? So Preston, I'll throw that to you. And if you had other comments.
I thought you were going with it. Okay. So I think it's the leadership, number one, leadership by example, right? Leadership by example. So when you have your CEO and executive leadership team are genuinely talking about it, right? And asking questions in the meeting, right? Unapologetically, like, have we looked at any diverse candidates, and sharing insights and perspectives of why it is important to that leader, right? I mean, I think at that high level, informal training, it has to happen that way. Why is it important for me as a leader to want to build a strong culture of diversity? Why is it good for the business? What are some of the data points? What are some of the things that the CEO has learned as to why it's important? What happens as a result of that is that, the employees have to take notice, and they have to say, wow, I didn't know about that information. Let me dig deeper into it. So now the employee informally is training themselves about the why it's important. And then now they begin to mirror the activities and the actions of the leadership, and it starts to permeate throughout the company. So that's sort of on the informal side. The other aspect is, I think leadership needs to, and this is another informal methodology, the leadership has to bring all voices to the table, right? Whether you have affinity groups or employee resource groups in your organization or not, you have to have a forum or create a forum where you're bringing diverse perspectives to the table to help address real business challenges, real business problems, product and services questions. Get insight from those at the table. They don't have to be executive leaders, right? They can just be middle management or, high potential individual contributors, but create a forum where they can come to the table and feel like they have value and that they are empowered with a voice, right? And I think as those individuals share their experiences about the opportunity to be representative at the table with the leadership of the company, again, that creates a culture or a sense that I am valued, right? Whether, I'm African American, whether I'm Hispanic, whether I'm a woman, whether I'm LGBTQ, whether I'm disabled, it doesn't matter. The fact that it matters, you're at the table, you're sharing your voice, you're given an equal opportunity, people care. That's a huge difference, and that's part of the community. So that I think that informal training can be done. And I say informal training because a lot of folks get caught up on how much do I have to spend on training, right? But you have to do that, right? That it starts with that. And then on the formal side, there's some great unconscious bias trainings and on all those types of things. But I would say if you do all the formal training and you don't have these informal things happening in your environment, you're not going to get the same value. You're not going to get the same value. And then the last piece I would say is, even if your company right now today does not have diverse leadership, but you're working towards it, right? And you're committed to doing that, that's awesome. You still have an opportunity to engage externally with partners. And Bill mentioned this. There are partners that you can work with, organizations that focus on DEI, or Black Women Talk Tech, or DeVinc, or Austin Justice Coalition, Autumn, the Austin Urban Technology Movement. There are organizations within Austin that you can partner with that allows you to demonstrate your intention to want to bridge the gap on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can have internal partners with your affinity groups or your voice, your voices at the table, and you can also have external partners, which I think is just as critical, right? Because it shows the outward genuineness of the company. And then because of that outward genuineness of the company, you now have a talent pool. You now have an access to a talent pool external to your company that you did not have before, right? And so the criticality of how you engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion, internally and externally, is really, really key. So from my perspective, those will be the things that I would really encourage leaders to do for their company, to drive that training and knowledge base and within internally in the company.
Yeah, and I think that's a really natural segue to the last conversation that I want, and questions that I want to put out to you two. We have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we wrap up on time and have time for questions if anyone wants to stay after. There's a lot of chat within the chat box around these partnerships. I see Michael Ward is on. Hi, Michael. He runs an incredible organization that you mentioned called Autumn. They do a number of recruiting events. Definitely connect with him if you're looking for someone specifically in Austin who does this type of work. Latanya Pegues is incredible as well. I see Management Leadership for Tomorrow. So there's a lot of different organizations you can reach out to, but how do you develop that in an authentic way? How do you bring them into your process and making sure that this is happening in a way that benefits and really grows your talent pool and is not just for show? So Phil, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think we were talking about talent acquisition a little earlier, and where and how do you identify talent? There are a number of community organizations, as we've just mentioned, that I think can help bridge the gap to identify that talent. And so how do you now develop those relationships? Well, first thing is identification of who they are, and then bringing them into the process, right? Talking to them about how decisions are made, how talent acquisition decisions are made, giving them some ideas and cues as to, look, here's what kind of diverse talent are we looking for, right? And it's not around numbers, it's really around competency to a large degree and fit. And so I think if we can identify those community organizations, I think we can certainly develop, partnerships with them. But I think that's on the talent acquisition side. I'm thinking more so on the, how do you develop bench strength? How do you identify those workforce development organizations that you might be able to develop some sort of platform, technology training platform, and identify what are the key 3 to 5 positions, functions that we're going to need over the next several years. And now let's go out and develop some sort of private-public partnership with workforce development organizations. I happen to be on the board of Workforce Solutions Capital area here in Austin. But how do you now develop that kind of partnership, right? Where these organizations can now help you to build bench strength, and you can also bring in an academic institution potentially, right? So maybe at the high school level, we start identifying what are those skills that ABC organization is going to need in the next 5 to 7 years. What are the skill sets, competencies, training that they're going to need? Let's begin to partner with academic high schools around instituting some of that kind of training and agenda for them, and then filter that through some of the workforce development organizations to develop maybe some public partnerships. So I think there's a number of things that can be done from a community engagement perspective. And by the way, some of them are already being done in different industries, in the manufacturing space. I know there's these kinds of initiatives that are taking place currently. So it's always a matter of creativity, innovativeness, and courage, right? But the opportunity is certainly there.
Yeah, Lauren, may I add one, because I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to share last few comments, if that's okay.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So to answer also that question about the genuine outreach, genuine community engagement, I would like to offer this. I think it's awesome for companies to have a internal initiative in terms of what they want to do and how they want to increase their diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think it's just as well, especially in light of where we are today with COVID-19 and the exposure of inequities in society, that companies can develop critical initiatives at the local level to engage with the community. As I made my transition from Dow to being an entrepreneur and a nonprofit leader, I understand how critical it is and how valuable it is to have our corporate leadership deeply invested in the local communities. And so, for example, given where we are today, does your company, or allow your company to decide, what initiatives do we want to get involved with and invest in as a company? And when I say invest in, that can be through employee volunteer programming, by corporate sponsorship, by opening up their space to host events. There's a number of ways that companies can give back and open up and support community engagement. And some initiatives today that might make a lot of sense is, we need help around criminal reform, right? Criminal justice reform. We need help around healthcare. We need help around education, entrepreneurship, voting. And then, and along with that is, how do we offer, most companies offer paid internships, but is there room for non-paid internships? Yes, all students want to get paid, but, at some level, just getting experience, right? Getting experience for a young African, a young African American or Latinx person does a world of difference. It did a world of difference for me. And so I think if if leaders start to think, or the organizations start to think about that local engagement, getting more in depth with that around these key initiatives, then you marry the culture of your company and is aligned with the community engagement. That is a win-win, not just for the company and the community, but also for the talent pool in which you want to recruit from, right? Because you will find people who have similar interests. You'll be working alongside with them, and they'll be interested in, wow, this company is engaged here. must be a wonderful company to be part of. So I think, there's some really wonderful opportunities that companies can sort of shift their focus, shift their resources, and shift their investment to really make an impact at the community level.
Hey, Lauren, this has been a great conversation, and that was the original intention. It looks like we have a good turnout as well. How do we now think, one of the things as we think about wrapping up is how do we now want to take this inaugural session and this initial conversation around race and equity, and specifically in the tech ecospace? How do we now want to move this forward to engage and involve tech leaders in the communities, tech leaders being CEOs and COOs, et cetera, C-suite individuals within the tech community, to engage them as well and to get their feedback and to begin to have some additional dialogue, but towards an end of developing a effective strategy, right? With tactics and timelines to begin to move the ball down the field as it relates to diversity in the tech community. So I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we maybe discuss before we're off.
Absolutely. So I'll give my perspective, and I think the way to do this, and this is key to all the conversations that we've been having, is that as an organization, you have to understand why in terms of diversity. And if you don't understand why you're bringing diversity in, and if your why is only so that you can move your numbers forward, so you could put the report out so you don't get backlash, that's not a good enough why, right? You have to understand how this is really benefiting your business. We spoke a little bit earlier, I think at the beginning of the call, about how diverse teams, diverse boards create more ROI for your companies. We know that if you have customers who are diverse, having that person in a leadership position or having those people who represent them is really important. If you look at diversity, it's not just about having someone with a different skin color or different gender sitting at your table. It's really about the diversity of thought and experience, right? So Amber mentioned in the beginning that she doesn't have our experience, right? And so because I've moved through the world in a different way, I bring a different perspective to every business conversation that I have. And that kind of diversity and that open dialogue is really going to shift the perspectives and make sure that you are able to innovate and move with this changing world. And so why wouldn't you want that as part of your overall business? So really understand your why before you start building these initiatives, or those initiatives are really going to fail. And I think in terms of your conversation, Phil, the question, start engaging us. So as we mentioned, we all have our different organizations where we do this work on a regular basis. Keep those conversations going. Don't let this die down just because the moment feels like it's past. Continue those conversations with people in your organization, engaging your employees, seeing what their needs are and what they want to do. Continue talking to Amber about the type of programming that you want to see, because like we said, this conversation can go on for a long time. We can continue talking about this and bring it into different aspects. So I hope that answers your question. If you two have any last parting thoughts, and then I'll turn over to Amber as well to see where she wants to go with this.
Well, I think from my perspective, this is, as I mentioned earlier, this has been refreshing, quite frankly, and encouraging. And I hope this is the beginning of additional dialogue around this very important topic, specifically as it relates to the technology space here in Austin. I valued a lot of all the comments that I heard today, and I think they were all right on. I think the question, as we all know, is, how do we now move? I think there's additional dialogue, obviously, we need to have and bring those individuals, additional individuals and stakeholders into the conversation. But then once we're able to kind of develop a platform, if you will, how do we now move that to action, right? How do we now implement? How do we now, a year from now, when we look at some of the technology, 2 years from now, we look at technology companies in Austin, that we see a number of Black and brown faces within the organization. permeated throughout the organization. So great conversation, great start, and I'm happy to be glad I was a part of it.
Yeah, from my perspective, you know, where we go from here, we said this earlier, we can't let this die down. And when I say that, not just, you know, nationally what's going on, but this conversation right here, we can't let it die down. So what I would love to see, you know, and, you know, putting Amber on the spot a little bit. I'm sorry, Amber.
Go ahead.
You know, how do we come back, you know, maybe in a month, you know, maybe every company that's in attendance today or did attend today, you know, maybe they select a leader or a representative that comes back, you know, in the month to say, hey, you know, this is what we're doing, or this is what we're challenged with. You know, how can ATC, how can, you know, that panel of Lauren, Preston, and Phil bring other parties to the table that can help us move forward, so that this is sort of an ongoing thing. So it's almost like sort of like a mastermind for diversity, equity, inclusion, right? I don't know, right? But I mean, I think there's an opportunity to really continue to have this engaged dialogue with it.
I think I may have frozen.
Preston froze.
I know we're all limited on bandwidth, but you know, there are other partners in the community that we can, you know, that we can actually work with and bring to the table to help us all move forward. Because, Amber, you said something in the beginning, and I'm going to throw this back at you in a good way, in a friendly way. You said, this is not about me. And I would argue with you and say, it is about us. It's about all of us. Because, you know, whether Black folks move forward and white people don't want to get engaged, that's not going to get the job done. So all of us together will make the difference. And so I love that you said that, but we want you to be part of this movement as well, because we got a lot of work to do, and it's going to take everybody to get it done.